welcome to our second episode of When Life Feels Messy.
Hello, everyone.
I am one of your wonderful hosts, Erin Raspberry.
And I'm your other wonderful host, Ashley Barrera.
Thank you so much for being here again. Before we dive into this episode, we really want to highlight a listener discretion / trigger warning for all of you out there that are listening. This topic in this episode will be covering all things including suicide. And so we ask that you take proactive measures. And if you're like, oh, maybe I'm not in the mental space to listen to this episode right now, please take the time that you need and be sure to not force yourself to listen to topics that might exasperate or make things feel not so great for you. We also ask that after you listen to this episode, you ensure that you are doing things to take care of yourself, as this can be a very intense topic and something that really weighs heavy on the minds of individuals for many different reasons, right? So whether you're planning to go for a walk, journal, do some arts and crafts, meet up with a friend or family member, do something that allows you to kind of focus on yourself and do some self-care after this episode.
Yes. Great tip, Erin.
Yes. And without further ado, let's dive on into the episode.
Let's dive on into it. So as Erin mentioned, we will be diving into the topic of suicide, as September is National Suicide Prevention Month here in the US. We wanted to share with you kind of the origins of this month and the purpose of, this episode. So September was first declared as National Suicide Prevention Month in 2008. Since then, September has been a time to acknowledge those affected by suicide, raise awareness, and connect individuals with suicidal ideation to treatment services. According to the CDC, each year more than 41,000 individuals die by suicide, leaving behind friends and family members to navigate the tragedy of their loss. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death among adults in the U.S. and the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 through 24. And these rates are increasing.
Right. And our college students are in that 10 to 24 bracket.
Yes. Our goal is ensuring that individuals, friends, and families have access to the resources they need to discuss suicide prevention and to seek help.
Yeah. Sounds like something that's pretty important, and, thankful that we have a month to recognize this, but this is something that needs year-round, everyday recognition. Because, as you just stated, it's such a huge thing that's affecting individuals in the world today. So many individuals are leaving this world because of this, right?
Yes. I've had clients and friends share that suicide can feel like a drop in an ocean, and it has like so many ripples that people don't really talk about when it comes to suicide, death, and grieving.
Yeah. And
the purpose of us having this conversation now is to shed light on that ripple effect.
Yeah. I think that's important to bring up, as with most mental health topics, right? The stigma against embracing or discussing that you have mental health concerns. But suicidality, ideation is so taboo. And there's so many negative connotations and how it's been viewed in the world, or especially around religious ideas, right? And it only adds to individuals not wanting to talk about it or to even share, hey, I'm experiencing these thoughts, right? Even if it's a very quick passive thought that you've never had before, right? It's like this idea of almost like guilt for feeling that sometimes, or experiencing that.
And there's a lot of different cultural perspectives and approaches on suicide that, as I read earlier, these 41,000 individuals uniquely experience, within their own life.
Yeah.
So let's dive more into it, specifically in the college years.
Yeah. So, I mean, we kind of talked about it last episode, right?
Mhm.
Of, why is seeking mental health such an importance for college students? What's kind of going on in their lives where this is a peak time where things are coming up, right? Well,
Mhm.
similarly to that, right, we see suicidal ideation is really high in the college years. And there's a bajillion reasons for that, right? But in
Mhm.
essence of time, let's just discuss some of the top ones. So we think about it as your college years are really this time of significant transition, right? So
Mhm.
students are maybe for the first time moving away from home. They're living away from home in a whole new environment
Yes.
where they don't have that support system just right down the hall.
People they don't know.
Right. People they don't know. And everyone out there probably has at least one roommate situation that was kind of creepy and probably not the best, right? That doesn't help anything.
Right.
You think about like there's less access to support from family and friends, especially for students who might move like hours away or even states away.
Or are used to, their familial or cultural experience very tight knit, where multiple generations are living in the same household.
Exactly. Right.
And now you're moving out into a smaller space with someone you don't know potentially.
A lot of people you don't know. You think if you're in a dorm, there's a million people in there around you. You also think about the increased freedom or independence. Students maybe for the first time are experiencing this, and we know that can have different effects on people. Some people don't handle that well. It's just like such a abnormal thing to them because they're not used to it, and it doesn't have the best effects sometimes.
Practicing their freedom and independence kind of exclusively for the first time.
And no, from personal experience as a first gen student, I did not get a lot of guidance at all about what even that freedom and independence look like and what to expect going to college. So you think about that too. Like there's not even that support to say, hey, I know what you should expect and I can teach you about this and what you'll need to prepare to take over. As we know too, college is a lot harder, rigorous than high school.
Extremely.
The stress from the academic demands is intense. I mean, you even think about our TWU community. These are very hard programs. If you're used to high school and you did maybe well in that, then you come to college and you're like, what is this?
Exactly.
I don't feel prepared at all, right?
Or maybe even supported. Like the difference in that transition academically with a high school teacher and a college professor.
Totally different.
Totally different.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes you can get really lucky in being in small classes and you know your professors pretty closely, but that's not always the case, especially when you're taking those intro classes and like you're one of like 100 plus, right? So you got to think about that. Also, alcohol and drugs might be coming into play for the first time.
Literally.
You've seen the movies, you know how it goes. This is where a lot of individuals really start experimenting for the first time. And what do we do with that? There's also this lack of knowledge of even what are the effects of alcohol and drugs on you, especially as this is a time where your brains are developing for most of you. The last thing we really want to talk about in this is if students are coming to college and they already had mental health concerns, especially concerns that they didn't even know was a concern,
literally,
and haven't been working on.
And on that note, it reminds me of kind of what we touched on last time of building that sense of self. Almost truly begins in those late high school, early college years when you have that increased independence, freedom, and you're trying to develop a support system or learning, how to make new friends or how to communicate with professors.
Exactly. And then if you throw in there, maybe even you're on your own, like, what is my religious journey going to look like? Am I like diving into a new one? Am I kind of straying away from what I grew up with? Throw in their sexuality concerns, right?
Yes.
You're figuring out who you are. What are those different type of pressures or stressors going on? So there's so many things, right? We could spend probably like hours talking about just this part of it. But I think hopefully that gives you a little sum, right, of why this is so important to talk about and why suicidal ideation is so high in the college years. Because this is a stressful time. This is so stressful. So let's even navigate into statistics. So what we see is that the American College Health Association is showing that the suicide rate among young adults, which are ages in between 15 and 24, have tripled since the 1950s.
Wow.
Tripled. And I say that in all caps and emphasis.
Like, no words can describe how shocked I am.
And then you think about how little this is talked about, but yet it's tripled. It just fathoms me.
Yeah, so I'm not surprised that the second leading cause of death for college students is suicide.
Yeah, and that's risen from the third just within, I think, the last 10-ish years. Another statistic shows that about 1,100 suicides are occurring on college campuses each year.
Each year?
Each year. This is happening. 1 in 5 students have had thoughts of suicide. You can look around at your study group right now, right? How many of you are sitting there? This is something that's as common as you sitting in a space with 5 people. One of you has had thoughts, if not more. And along with that, 9% of students have made an attempt, and nearly 20% of students are reporting self-injury. So whether it's cutting, that's high. That is high. You think about, this is the percentage of college students across the nation, I think, is this specific statistic. If we looked at the world, I can't even imagine what that would look like right now.
So another statistic is 25% of college students know of someone who has died as a result of suicide.
Can we just take a second? 25%. That is a fourth of college students in the nation today know someone. A fourth.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people.
Of ripples.
So many ripples.
Yes.
And lastly, 40% know of someone who has attempted.
As we were going through these statistics, I recognized something that was coming up for me, and not just about what these statistics represent, but I guess in the manner of this conversation is that not just talking about suicide, but talking about the effects of suicide like we just did can feel and sound really scary.
Yeah.
So as you're listening to me and Aaron, share with you, the purpose in these stats, if you also are feeling maybe frightened or scared or in disbelief as we are, just notice that in your body. Like where do you feel that for yourself? Kind of help yourself bring yourself back to a present moment. Maybe notice, if your shoulders are tensed up right now, if you can't notice, your chest going up and down with the breaths.
Yeah.
Kind of help yourself ground yourself back to wherever you are physically.
Yeah, this might be a good point to pause our episode and just take a second for you, because those statistics can be hard to kind of swallow.
Yeah.
And our brain can kind of take us down a rabbit hole of thinking about things. So if this is a spot that you need to pause, or any part of this you need to pause, please do so. Yes. We highly encourage it.
Yes. And on that note, before we move further into today's episode, I wanted to share that part of, why we're doing these podcast episodes is to really foster a way to have conversations about these really uncomfortable topics. And, suicide is this podcast's first topic really into the big umbrella of mental health.
Right.
So.
And it's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a big one to start off with, but we couldn't avoid it because it's September and we have to talk about it.
Right. So as we're talking about how to talk about suicide.
Yeah.
let's dive into some correct language to use
Yes.
when we're talking about it.
Yeah. And I think this is something that isn't talked about enough. This was something that was even eye-opening for me as I was researching this, because, you know, growing up, you hear certain ways to talk about suicide. And what we find is actually the language we use can be detrimental. And we have to be more careful about the way we say things and how we communicate about suicide. So one of the things that I really found is that a lot of phrases that have been used in the past are really stigmatizing. And the way that we talk about it has been so ingrained in our vocabulary that we haven't even really noticed the negative effects that it can have. But words matter. And it's important for us to be able to highlight where are even the appropriate ways that we need to change this language around suicide.
So, as you mentioned, words matter because they can promote the stigma, but they're also a tool to help break down that stigma.
Exactly.
And foster a safe way to have these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're just going to kind of go through some, I would say, traditional verbiage that we're going to start challenging, right? And ways that we can correct ourselves. I know not only for me and Ash, but you listeners, as you go about communicating, you know, in the future about this, which we hope you do, because that's what we need. So one of the big phrases that I know I grew up and still today hear all the time is committed suicide. But commit really comes from an era when suicide was considered a crime. And this is really reinforcing the stigma that it's a selfish act. It's against, you know, certain religions. It results in, you know, going to hell. At least that's what my religion always said, right? Like suicide means immediate going to hell, right? There's so many negative connotations with that. So instead of saying committed suicide, the correct verbiage now is died of or died by suicide.
Instead, using suicide death or died by suicide or fatal suicide behavior, fatal suicide attempt, those are the appropriate terms.
And when you think about it, it makes sense. Why would we say successful or unsuccessful? Because that connotates that this is an achievement or something positive. And that's not appropriate at all for this. Not appropriate at all. Because as we know, a suicide attempt is either fatal or not fatal. It's not successful and it's not unsuccessful, right? So we really have to challenge this by saying things correctly. I think last one that I really want to highlight is the phrase that I know I heard a lot growing up, which is suicide is selfish. And what I found in my research, and I thought it was really interesting, and I just wanted to put it out there. This is really challenging the idea that individuals do not consider the impact on their loved ones. But if you think, in fact, and I know from my experience in working with clients or individuals, right, they are thinking more so on, if I'm not here, then that will lessen the burden on my loved ones. My presence here is what burdens them. So if I remove myself, then that's no longer an issue for them. So when we say suicide is selfish, we really are not even thinking or caring to think about what that individual actually felt. So I think that's important.
That is important to highlight.
Yeah.
On that note, instead of saying John is suicidal, we now will practice saying John is thinking of suicide or has suffered through suicidal thoughts.
Right.
And adjusting this language is really important, as you mentioned, to put that person before the symptom, like people first language.
Yeah.
Is really important when we're talking about suicide.
Right. Because we do not want to define anyone by their experience with suicide, because they are more than their suicidal thoughts. And with that, I think let's segue into some warning signs, risk factors, protective factors, right? So this is where, dear listeners, we want you to really pay attention to, because this information not only is helpful for you, as you gain awareness in yourself and you do your own mental scans, but in the people around you.
Yes.
The people that are in your environment, these are things to watch out for. And so, in thinking of people that, might be displaying suicidal ideation or things like that, some things that they could be talking about would be, of course, wanting to die, right?
Yes.
You hear a lot of statements of them saying, I don't want to be here anymore.
Or, this would be easier if I wasn't here anymore.
Yeah. If they're talking about having great shame or guilt, or if they're talking about being a burden to others, just kind of like what we talked about, because there's this big sense a lot of the times of their life is weighing so heavily, right? And is so burdensome to others that they feel like it would be better if they were not here. So those are things to listen for and to look out for. Also, if they express, or if you're feeling these feelings of emptiness, hopelessness, feeling trapped, having no reason to live, there's nothing you can think of that gets you up in the morning. If you're experiencing extreme sadness, maybe you're feeling more anxious, you're agitated, you're full of this rage and anger, or even an unbearable emotion or physical pain. These are things to be aware of. Behavior-wise, if someone's making a plan, or you find that they're researching ways to die, or you're feeling like, let me research ways to die, that's a big sign. If you're withdrawing from friends and you're going so far as to say goodbyes to these people, you're giving away important items, you're making a will. These are all signs that you are thinking about the end, so to speak. If you're taking dangerous risks, such as driving extremely fast, like you're not focused really on, oh, this could be dangerous and my life could end, that awareness is not as important there. Increased substance use, displaying extreme mood swings, eating or sleeping more or less, and using drug or alcohol more often. So these are all warning signs to look out for in yourself and others.
Yes. We also wanted to highlight some warning signs that are easy to miss. So Erin highlighted some to notice about yourself or others through talking, feelings, and behaviors. Now let's talk about some that are maybe easy to miss. Any unusual changes in behavior. So let's say, let's stick with John. Hypothetical John has a routine of going to an ice cream shop every Friday. All of a sudden, John starts going less and less, and now he's not showing up anymore. And you, as a cashier or his friend or family member, notice that. That's an unusual change in behavior. That's just an example. It could be, anything else.
Could be he got healthy. You
right.
Never know. Yeah. Like ice cream every day was not good.
Also, something to note, changes in sleeping patterns. Like Erin mentioned, sleeping too little or too much.
Yeah.
That could look like getting 1 to 2 hours or sleeping all day long.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one to even explore a little bit more, because I feel like a lot of the times we relate sleep to, oh, well, they're a teenager and they sleep all the time and they need more sleep. They're staying up all night and sleeping all day. But that's not always the case, right?
Right.
And so it's important, if you're noticing, right, that that's happening, to check in on that person. It could honestly be that they're staying up late and gaming and then sleeping throughout the day. Okay. Maybe not the healthiest. I know my body couldn't function like that. But being aware of, okay, that's not a normal
for me,
right?
Or for that person.
Right. So let me check in and make sure it's not something more.
Right. Another thing that could be easy to miss is accessing lethal means. So this could look like going through the process to obtain things to end your life or their life, which is researching online different ways to die, or finding drugs or alcohol, or collecting that.
Right. Buying guns, buying lots of knives, whatever it may be.
Something also to know is emotional distance. So noticing if, you yourself are intentionally being emotional distant to people around you, people closest to you, pushing others away, or you notice someone maybe is doing that towards you, right?
Right.
Being distant or avoidant.
Right. Yeah.
Something also to note is physical pain. So this could look like random lower back pain or headaches
Yeah.
or maybe your gut or intestines are like really acting up, and that's not normal.
Yeah, I think that one's a big one that's overlooked so much too, is like you always associate physical pain with a physical ailment usually, right? But there are so many physical pains that are associated with suicidal ideation.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's navigate into risk factors. So these are things that really increase the risk that suicidal ideation might be present in individuals. And so we're going to go through those looking at different categories such as individual, relationship, community, and societal. So let's start with individual. So if someone has had previous suicide attempts, they've had history of depression and other mental illnesses, maybe even serious illnesses such as chronic pain. Again, something that's not talked about enough, that individuals that experience this never stopping pain, the thought of, man, I just want this to be over, comes up a lot more than it's talked about.
Yeah.
If they've experienced criminal and legal problems, job and financial problems or loss, anyone ever lost a job or taken financial hit, the stress of that, especially when you have a family to take care of, and other, priorities and things, it's a lot. Impulsive or aggressive tendencies, substance misuse, current or prior history of adverse childhood experiences, sense of hopelessness, and violence, victimization, and or perpetration. So these are risk factors for the individual level. In terms of relationship, individuals that have been bullied. We see that all the time in the news of school students, elementary students even, that are, dying by suicide because they were bullied.
Also, to highlight on bullying, it's not only something that occurs in, middle school, high school. It occurs in family systems.
Right.
A parent, an uncle, a brother, friends, right? That's
your bosses.
Right? Yes.
Yeah. Very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Another thing would be if family or loved ones have a history of suicidal ideation, maybe loss of relationships, the pain of that loss.
Yeah.
It's really great.
As you mentioned, 40% of college students know someone who has attempted.
Exactly.
Or 25% of college students know someone who actually has died as a result of suicide.
Exactly, yes. You could be in a high conflict or violent relationship, or maybe social isolation. In terms of the community, lack of access to healthcare can be a big contributor. Suicide clusters in the community. That again is not talked about enough.
Wow.
But something that has a huge effect and does not get enough coverage or talked about. Stress of acculturation. Again, not something that's talked about enough, right? And coming from a very conservative area growing up, there was almost this horrible negative connotation of, well, if you're coming to America, if you're going to live here, well, then you have to do it how Americans do. And you think about, I grew up in a 1,000 population town, but that's the mindset of so many people in America and the nation today. And when you have individuals, no matter what culture they're coming from, that are coming in, they're facing that. They're facing that. They're also facing the pressures from their own culture, right? To keep that, while also facing prejudices and discrimination. Like, there's so much with that. Community violence, historical trauma, discrimination. Societal wise, we see stigma associated with help seeking mental illness. Why we're doing this, right? To help break that. We see that there is an easy access to lethal means of suicide among people at risk. We see that all the time. The media is always talking about that in some way, shape, or form.
Yep.
And we also see unsafe media portrayals of suicide, whether it's in the movies, on the news, whatever. Our news feeds are flooded with this a lot of the times.
Before we move on to protective factors, we want to check in with our listener.
Yeah.
If this is another good moment to pause, bring yourself back to that present moment, take a walk, actually pause the podcast right here, go take a walk, maybe do a light stretching, you know, eat your favorite candy.
Yes.
This topic is heavy.
This topic is really heavy. And we understand that. And we understand if it takes you 3 days to listen to this episode.
Yes.
Right?
So with that being said,
let's dive back in.
Let's dive back into protective factors. How would you describe like a concept of protective factors for our listener?
So you think about like risk factors really are, unfortunately, a lot of things that people don't really have control over, depending on what your family history is with mental health, the environment you grow up in,
historical trauma,
all kinds of things, right? Those unfortunately increase the risks for suicidal ideation, suicidality, but there are protective factors. What we've seen is that there are certain aspects on the individual, relationship, community, societal levels that protect individuals against experiencing intense suicidality. And these are also things that you as an individual can work to gain these protective factors in place.
Notice them or attempt to implement them in your life.
Exactly.
Within the individual level, effective coping and problem solving skills as number one. Reasons for living.
Right. You think about a person who can't find any reasons to live, right? That's a huge risk factor. You can't find one thing that gets you out of bed, that makes you want to pursue a life and live life to the fullest.
Correct.
It's going to be a problem.
Having a strong sense of cultural identity is really important in that individual level as a protective factor.
Yeah.
Within relationships, having support from partner, friends, and family is really key as a protective factor.
Yeah.
Feeling connected to others, of course.
So you think about if you are someone who doesn't have the support of others, right? You don't have that family support system, that friend support system. You're not feeling connected to others. You don't have a sense of where you belong in your identity culturally, right? That belongingness is a huge thing. Huge thing to
sense
individuals.
Of belonging.
Exactly. And without that, it makes so much sense why the risk for suicidal ideation and suicidality is increased, right? These are important protective factors to know that we have those people that are there for us, that support us, that love us, right? And that sense of, I belong here.
Exactly. Yes. Another thing that emphasizes that community, that sense of belonging, is availability of consistent and high quality physical and behavioral health care. Within society, reduced access to lethal means of suicide among people at risk. Now that's a controversial thing right there.
We're still seeing that in the news every day.
But it's really important when we look at those risk factors and how impactful they are when we're going through these.
Yeah.
Cultural, religious, and moral objections to suicide are also protective factors when you're noticing that in society, those like mainstream stigmas, you know, or even attempting to get that community support. What is mainstream society? I'm saying that in quotes, you know.
Yeah.
What is that stigma looking like?
Yeah. There's some power in various cultural, religious, moral objections to suicide, right? Like
and can save individuals at times.
It does.
So let's talk about how to help someone that you know that is experiencing suicidal ideation or is displaying those suicidal behaviors we talked about earlier.
Yes. So the key thing here is assume you are the only one who's going to reach out to this person, right? Don't say, oh, well, their partner will notice, their mom will notice when they talk to them.
Right.
Because that could be the difference in saving a life.
Yes.
So always assume you're the only one that notices and you're reaching out. So when you do this, talk to them in private. Listen to their story. Don't listen to just respond. Actively listen. Be present with them. Show empathy and concern. Let them know that you care about them.
Yes, and in that active listening piece, that includes listening to what is being said, like the exact words, and then you repeating them.
Right. Reflecting back to them.
Out loud what you heard.
Yes. Make sure that they know that you're not distracted and on your phone while they're talking to you, right? Because that can make people feel so much worse, right? Be very intentional about the presence that you're giving people when you're communicating with them about this. Also, ask them directly about suicide. Do not beat around the bush here. You can do this calmly and without judgment, but with getting to the point, right?
Yes, exactly.
Show them understanding. Take their concerns seriously. Don't ward it off of, oh, you'll be fine. No, you'll be okay. That's not as bad as you think it is, right? Do not do that, right? That just further invalidates people and makes them feel like, one, they're probably agreeing like, hey, yeah, I am a burden that I thought I was to this person, right? They think I'm too much right now.
Right.
And two, you're just making them feel like their emotions, their feelings, their thoughts aren't valid, right? Let them know that their life matters to you, right?
Even if it doesn't matter to them in that moment,
right?
It matters to you, and that is really important to share in that conversation.
So if a person says out loud that they are thinking about suicide, take that person seriously and work with them to keep them safely away from all lethal means, right? Whatever that may look like for that person, what's in their house, what's in their environment. Also, stay with them and call the National Suicide Prevention Line or other suicide hotlines in the area, such as our TW CAPS helpline, right? That's 24/7. Stay with them. Make sure that they're getting the help that they need, right? Yes. And encourage them to seek treatment or to contact their therapist or doctor, right? To get the adequate help that's needed.
Yes. So let's dive into hotlines. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 988. What happens when you call the lifeline?
Right. How do we break up that scary unknown aspect of this?
Yes. So first you will hear an automated message featuring additional options while your call is routed to the local lifeline network in your area. They will play a little bit of music while you are connected to a skilled and trained crisis worker. A trained crisis worker at your local center will answer the phone. This person will listen to you, understand how your problem is affecting you, provide you support, hear you out, and get you the help you need.
Yeah.
What's important to mention also is that this lifeline is free.
Yep.
It is confidential.
Yep.
No one will know that you're calling it.
Unless you want them
to know. And it is available 24/7.
24/7, 365.
365, all the hours.
Yep. Yeah.
Very important to mention.
Yes. So save this in your phone, 988. This is an important phone number, not only for you, but for you to be able to share with others, because you never know who you're going to be around or who you know that this number would save their life.
Yes. We also want to mention again our TW CAPS crisis line, which is 940-898-4357, which is help. Right?
And again, that is something that is offered to you 24/7. Just a brief snippet again. During business hours 8 to 5, you'll be connected with one of our crisis counselors on our Denton campus. And outside of that, you will be linked to a crisis counselor through an external organization. Either way, again, 24/7, 365 access.
There is also a crisis text line, so you can text if you don't feel comfortable talking to someone yet, voice to voice. Do a text, right? Send a text. So what you will do is open up your text and text the word home, HOME, to the number 741741 to reach a crisis counselor.
Yeah. And we're going to put this full list again in the episode description.
Yes.
So you do not have to like hurriedly jot this down. Like we're going to have this accessible to you. But again, we just want to make sure that you have these resources at all times.
Yes. So if you made it this far, please give yourself a hug.
Yes. All the hugs.
All the hugs.
All the love.
We know this is a heavy topic. We know this is a controversial topic, but it is also a very important topic to bring awareness and a conversation to.
Yeah. So let's even, kind of segue out of this episode by just really reinforcing why is it important to spread awareness about suicide and having these National Suicide Prevention months. And really that centers around putting the topic of suicide out in the open helps to start the conversation that could save a life.
Researchers and mental health experts have found that raising awareness helps suicide prevention efforts.
The National Institute on Mental Health, or NIMH, advises that having the conversation with someone who may be considering suicide can be the best way to stop them and to help them get the help that they need.
Suicidal thoughts do not discriminate and can be experienced by anyone, regardless of age, gender, or background, and it is often the result of an ongoing mental health condition that has not been attended to.
Preventing suicide is truly a community effort. This involves families, friends, coworkers, employees, organizations, and whole communities working together.
Our most valuable resource is each other.
Yes. So to our TW community, we have to work together for this.
Yes.
So, with that, like we mentioned last time, we are going to end every episode with a quote that we really feel like sums up the episode.
Yes.
And what we want to get across. But this month, Ashley and I could not decide.
We could not.
So we each picked one.
We figured and agreed that this month's episode deserved two quotes.
Deserved it.
2 quotes.
Yes. So we're going to share those with you.
Yes.
The first quote is, "It isn't weak to ask for help. It's like using a flashlight when you're lost in the dark."
I love
it.
Love
Chills.
The second quote, "There is hope even when your brain tells you there is not." By John Green.
I need to say that to myself every day. Literally.
Those 2 quotes are very powerful.
Yeah. Yes. And hopefully they give you a little motivation to get you through this next month until our next episode.
Yes.
Because we are at the end. And so we hope that you found this episode helpful, informational, maybe even affirming to know, hey, I experienced these things, or I know someone experiences these things, and now I feel more confident and knowledgeable about what to do, right? So with that, we say, remember to take care of yourselves after this episode.
Yes.
Right?
Remember those proactive things we talked about very beginning?
Yep.
Let's try to do those now.
Yes. And stay tuned for next month's episode, which will be over National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. That is what October is. So we can't wait to dive into that topic and hope you stay tuned. And with that, we'll say peace out.
Peace out, and thank you for listening.
Bye.